Minogi shikat, minogi shikat, minogi shikat, minogi shikat. It's a good day, and you're meant to be here right where you stand. It's a good day. We fall down and we get back up again. It's a good day. It wasn't yesterday, but things can change. It's a good day. Minogi shigat, minogi shigat, minogi shigat, minogi shigat. And I can see that we're all stars connected in a constellation. Constellation. I can see that we're all stars connected. And I can see that we're all stars connected in a constellation. Constellation. I can see that we're all stars connected. And I can see that we're all stars connected in a constellation. Constellation. I can see that we're all stars connected. It's a good day, and you're meant to be here right where you stand. It's a good day. We fall down and we get back up again. It's a good day. It wasn't yesterday, but things can change. It's a good day. Minogi shikat, minogi shikat, minogi shikat, minogi shikat.
Hello and welcome to the Durham Indigenous Voices discussion series. My name is Samantha from the Clarington Public Library and Museums. I'm very honored to start this event this evening. Durham Region is situated on the treaty and territory, traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississaugas peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewa of Georgia First Nation, covered by the Williams Treaties. For me as a newcomer, I realized that I have benefited from the colonization of this land. When I learned more about the Indigenous history in Canada, I truly respect the peoples who have taken care of the Turtle Island and who have fostered knowledge building and sharing in our society. With respect and gratitude, I want to acknowledge the lands and peoples of the Indigenous peoples. May we continue to learn on this land through seeking the truth in this land's history. Now we will take a moment of silence. honoring and reflecting upon the 1,100 plus children whose bodies have been discovered and those left to be uncovered, mourning the lives of all children, families, and loved ones who have been impacted by residential schools across Turtle Island.
So Ani, Bojo, welcome. Wasanang Gishgang Indigenakas, Nea Shinging Amingen Dinjaba, Curtis Indinji, Michigan Dodam, Anishna Bekwe Badawadami Ojibwe, French and Dao. So Ani Bojo means my spirit recognizes your spirit. Wasanang Gishgang is my name as known to all creation, which loosely translates to light in the sky. I'm from Neashingiming First Nation on the shores of Georgian Bay. That's where my mother was born and raised. However, I'm a band member of Batchewana First Nation on the shores of Lake Superior. And I'm Mishikan Dada means I'm part of the Turtle Clan. And I am Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and French, hence the last name Pigeon. So my English name is Julie Pigeon, and I have been with Durham College for 10 years. And I just need to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and will be available for viewing. And it's also being posted on Facebook Live. But I've been with Durham College for 10 years and am currently working in the capacity of Indigenous Student Success Coordinator. I've grown up in the Durham region and have now chosen to raise my family here as well. So it's with great pleasure that I am part of this collaboration, which magnifies Indigenous voice and highlights ways in which we as Indigenous and non-Indigenous community members can work together for the benefit of generations to come and for the health and well-being of our communities and indeed the earth itself. The session this evening is the second in a four-part series: Reconciliation, Resistance, Resilience, and Resurgence. I'd like to acknowledge our collaborative partners, so Durham College, OnTech, DCSI, OnTech Student Union, all of the Durham Region libraries, and the Region of Durham. What started out as a couple of conversations with Sherry Kabiasi from the Whitby Library and Jessica Triner at the Pickering Library soon grew into an amazing series of much needed conversation with a very engaged community. It makes me have a greater appreciation for how the universe strives to bring people together to ensure that amazing things happen. Please note that the content this evening may be triggering to people, and we've included phone numbers for those who seek assistance and support. This is a safe space and respectful environment where we're coming together to initiate important dialogue. So please come in with that in mind and know that we will have a question and answer period at the end that will be moderated by our amazing technical team. I also ask that everyone be mindful that many of us have been re-traumatized by the continual uncovering of Indigenous children at former Indian residential school sites. These findings will continue to be part of the Canadian narrative. The truths that Indigenous communities have been sharing for years and are now only being heard by mainstream Canada. I am curious to see what the response will be as we continue to unearth this horror and what you are going to do about it. Our goals for these sessions were to promote authentic allyship, create an environment of action, and increase visibility and voice. I implore all the members of the audience not just to show up for the big moments or the webinars, but to also be willing to do the nitty-gritty work that needs to be done. Use your voice, use your sphere of influence, hold your elected officials accountable, support Indigenous businesses, grassroots organizations, and communities. Stand shoulder to shoulder with Indigenous communities and help with the heavy lifting. Share our stories, share what you've learned, and implore others to join you in this path of reconciliation. Our topic of discussion this evening is resistance. I want you all to know that Indigenous people have been resisting for more than 500 years. Resistance has been necessary for the preservation of all life. The media in Canada has continuously and persistently told a narrative around Indigenous resistance and framed it in a way that has been harmful to Indigenous peoples and communities and has created a great divide. The concept of us and them is built into the stories about Canada. It all started with the doctrine of discovery and this concept of terra nullius, that these lands were not occupied and that they could be claimed through legal and moral justification so that the land could be exploited, regardless of the original inhabitants who continuously claim sovereignty over their lands. The Crown and the federal government have continually created policies in order to gain unfettered access to Indigenous lands in order to exploit the bounty of natural resources, regardless of the cost to human life and to all life. In that process, they have left a legacy of harm, violence, and destruction. I hope that Canada is beginning to see more clearly as the bodies of Indigenous children are slowly being uncovered. The map of Canada is now forever marred by these crime scenes. The innocent Indigenous children were taken from their families in Canada's attempt for the final solution of the Indian problem. What was not expected was that Indigenous people would resist and resist and resist. Indigenous people understand the power that is in their language, the medicine that is their culture. The resistance comes in the forms of speaking our languages, continuing to abide by our original instructions, continuing to be the stewards for the environment and the land. Indigenous people continue to defend the land that is our mother, because she provides everything that we require to survive. We have to take care of our mother because she is who takes care of us. The us and them narrative can be easily seen in the events of a summer more than 30 years ago, known by most Canadians as the Oka crisis and known as the resistance at Kanesatake by the Indigenous community. The town of Oka, Quebec planned to expand a golf course without consultation onto a piece of land called the Pines. The land is sacred to the Haudenosaunee, who were opposed to the expansion because it was their burial grounds. This created the perfect story with the iconic pictures that highlighted the us and them narrative and divided our communities. A peaceful blockade prevented the expansion, but soon the Quebec police were called in while Indigenous women, children, elders, and men stood at the front lines to defend the land. But the story actually starts many, many, many years before. It started in the early 1700s when the French king granted a Catholic mission in New France a large parcel of land to be held in trust for the Mohawks in the region to the northwest of Montreal called Kanesatake. The church mission instead quickly gave itself ownership and title to the land and began to sell parcels to settlers. The story continues under British rule and peaceful protest letters by Kanesatake community. These are ignored for hundreds of years. The Indigenous community continued to dispute and they continued to ignore that, so that in the summer of 1990, the news of the Oka crisis gets plenty of mainstream media attention, where we see rocks being thrown by Canadians at Indigenous women, children, men trying to cross the bridge. And this is all while the police sat watching and doing nothing. Unfortunately, Corporal Marcel Lemay lost his life during this brutal summer. In the months and the years that followed, the land has not been returned to the original peoples, but it did provide some fertile ground for growth. And this is part of the narrative that you might not have heard. But Corporal Lemay's sister, Francine, had grown up in the region where there had historically been lots of tension between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. Her brother had died during this conflict, and she would have had every reason to continue to maintain negative stereotypes and continue to place blame on Indigenous communities. Instead, a series of events took place where she began to question the stories that she had been told. She began to seek truth from the people in the communities. She began the process of unlearning what she had been told was the truth. And she began to build bridges, making respectful, reciprocal relationships with people in the Kanesatake community. She said, "I was deeply moved in learning of the deception, the exploitation, the injustice, and the forced removals the people had to endure." She opened her heart and did the hard work. She faced the ugly truths that she had been fed, and she became a fierce and formidable ally. And she said, "In spite of my loss, I was determined that my contribution would be to make known the losses of the Mohawks had suffered." And this is another quote from Francine that I think is very impactful. She said, "Peace is not free. It costs us our pride, our selfishness, our indifference, and our prejudice." I invite you all to consider all the things that have happened to you for you to be joining us here this evening. How did you find out about this session? Did someone invite you? How did you meet them? Our lives are inextricably woven together in ways that we don't understand. To each of you who has found your way here tonight, I am so glad that our paths have crossed. And I am so glad that you have started your journey with us. And I hope that this continues for a long time to come. I do not buy into this narrative of us and them. I know that we are a collective and that what one part of our society does affects the rest, that we are all related, that we are not separate from the earth, but a part of her. We are a microcosm of the macrocosm, about 75% water, just like our mother, the earth. Just a little replication. We are the earth. We are the medicine. We are the solution. Resistance has been for the preservation of life, knowing that the work of our language, water, and land defenders does not just benefit Indigenous communities, it is the work that benefits us all. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the members of our panel who are the fiercest language, water, and land defenders. I am eternally grateful for all the work that they do that helps all of us. So first up, it's my pleasure to introduce Shirley Ida Eliza Williams. She is a member of Wikwemikong Unceded Indian Reserve on Manitoulin Island. Shirley has received an award for excellence in the Indigenous education of First Nations community by Wikwemikong Board of Education in 2009 and an Alumni Excellence Award from Trent. Shirley says that she retired in 2004 from Trent University and received her full professorship in 2003 on Indigenous knowledge, but she's still working. She has been teaching language and culture at Trent University for 18 years and continues to teach on a part-time basis, even though she says she's retired. She has taught courses on Ojibwe and Odawa from introduction to intermediate and fourth-year courses, including an identity course, a special topic course on land and environment, and understanding residential schools and immersion languages. Plus has done some web-based language courses as well. Shirley is the living embodiment of resistance. Having survived the Indian residential school experience in the decades that followed, becoming a fierce advocate for teaching Anishinaabe and making language reacquisition possible for so many people. Whenever I'm in Shirley's presence, I feel like I'm in the presence of greatness. So it is my distinct honor to let her have the floor and speak. So, miigwech.
I had to unmute myself. Good evening. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'm saying to myself, really? I did that? That's who I am? Yes. I don't quite know where to begin. That's one of the emails was sent to me. It says language warrior. So I'm going to begin from there. Being a language warrior, I didn't think myself of that at all, but warrior really struck to me because that's the word we use. A warrior in our language is someone who is living in an upright way, who fights for justice. A language, the warrior is someone who is a fighter for whatever is in the forefront to do what is right. So thank you for that, for calling me a language warrior. And I'd like to also to tell you, I'll be telling stories about this. I went to Hawaii. I was invited as an elder, and in there was they were having their powwow in Hawaii. Mind you, I didn't know that they had. There are some Native people there too, so they had um, uh, a powwow. In this, because I was an elder, I was asked to carry a flag in, and all of these flag carriers were all soldiers, and each of us, as we were introduced, we had to introduce ourselves. Why did you become a warrior? Why did you join the army or navy or whatever? And we're going down the line, and I'm standing there. I'm a woman carrying this Canadian flag, the Stampe flag, actually it was. And I'm standing there, and I thought to myself, what am I going to say? I'm not even, I haven't joined the army. You know, what army do I belong to? So I'm asking this myself. And then finally I said to myself, okay. I said a little prayer. Finally, something came to my mind. And it was the I am or. So when it came to my turn to introduce myself, I said, my name is Shirley Williams, and peasant, and I'm from Canada, Ojibwe Nation, and I too am a warrior, a language warrior. This is what I said. And I'm a warrior because I come from residential school. I'm a survivor where we were told that our language was not important. In that sense, I am a warrior. I said because I kept my language. We're in the residential school, we were forbidden to talk about our culture and language. So I wanted to begin from there and to tell the people. And my goodness, those people, they were from Germany, Sweden, and all over the world. That came to me after, and they said, yes, we understood what you're talking about. You are a warrior. So that was a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was, that I was carrier of the flag, Canadian flag. So my topic is on language and culture and revitalization. Uh, Actually, the language expresses our ideas of how we live. The culture is the way we live. So these two, they go hand in hand together. One cannot describe how you don't live or how you live, um, unless you know the culture, what the meaning behind the words and things and how you express that. So, and going back to residential schools, we talked about how the children were taken away from their mothers and community. I was one of them. Um, when I was 7 years old, my father, the priest and the Indian agent came and the mounted police to my place, and they asked my father if I would be to enlist me to go to school. And my father says, "You're not taking one of my children. I will homeschool her until she's the age of 10." And so they they argued, but my father stood his ground. And then after they left, they told my mother, he says, "You know what? Because they spoke in English, I didn't understand, but I knew the accents. He was quite annoyed. Annoyed is a very mild word I'm using. But it is after they left, he told my mother, and this is how I understood because he spoke in a language then. And he said, all of our children that have gone to the residential school are coming back and they don't want to speak the language anymore. They don't want to talk about the culture. They say that our culture is witchcraft. I want one of our daughters to know the language and culture." And she said, and I was sitting there and I thought, wow, what am I going to learn? What is my life going to be like? So from 7 years old on to 10 years old, I never left my side of my mother or father. They taught me all of the traditional way of life. They taught me about plants, names of trees and plants, the weather, uh, when it's dangerous and not dangerous, what's going to happen, a prediction, um, many different things, that the way we live, how you pick the medicine, uh, how you preserve it, how when it's time to pick it, and all of these things it taught me. Anytime that I wanted to play out, the owl said to me, "You don't know why I'm telling you this, my daughter, but someday you will understand. So please pay attention." So, and I would say, really pay attention. Then, really, this is really important. Yes, I didn't know why he was telling me all of these things, but today I do understand. At 10 years old, I came September. I was taken. It was my turn to go to, but my sisters informed me and told me what I would expect. They're just telling me what to expect. Really, I didn't really live it. But it came to my time that I was taken. There was no roads at that time. My sisters and brothers who went, two brothers that I went by boat on a barge, just like cows, how they travel, how they transport them. Well, I didn't have that because by that time when I came along, the roads were being built, so we went by a bus. And when the bus went and it took us to the residential school. I was last year that I was at home. They sort of prepared me. I know my father went to grade 8 and he spoke English. My mother only went to grade 2 and she spoke a little bit of the English. The only English language that I knew was "Blessed art thou." That's the only English sentence that I knew. The other one is, "What is your name? Um, do you know your prayers? And do you pee pee?" Those were very important to me at that time. Although they sound funny today, but it was really very funny. They were very valid then. So I went to residential school and with the bus, and something happened when the bus went into the gates to me because there were children in there. I suppose maybe before the girls maybe tried to run away. But you know what? When they opened the gate opened, the bus went in, and then the gates closed. I just remember something happened to me psychologically, that everything closed, even my own feelings. My heart closed also. From then on, we were trained to start being socialized. One of the things that when the nun came on, she says, "No googly gob language." I didn't know what googly gob language was, but I just remembered that word. Googly gob language means unintelligible sounds. That's what they thought about our language. And I didn't think that was right either. My language expresses everything, it's valid. But even then, I didn't understand what that word meant. I had to look it up after I spoke in English. But in 3 months while I was in the residential school, is I spoke the language in English. Because out of fear, we spoke it. If you spoke your language, we were forbidden. We got a strap, depending how many times. Uh, our culture, we could not talk about our culture because it was it was forbidden also. So those two, language and culture. But we found ways and means how to talk in our language. We used to go for walks on Saturdays and we would run way ahead because we were afraid of the tattletales because tattletales got paid. They got a piece of bread extra for telling on somebody who spoke the language or secretly. So that's how we learned to resist and to for us we trusted each other. We would run ahead, and then for that few minutes we were able to speak in our own language. That's how we preserved our language. The other one was, I remember, was at night before you go to bed, we used to cover our face with the sheet. There we would imagine about home. Um, you know, I talk about the shift, I forget there's an English word for it. It just went out of my mind right now. Um, Ship shaping. you take yourself from where situation you are psychologically and you move to your home. Actually, this really happened to me. So I was home. I could smell the wood, my father, my mother, and there's a particular smell that there was at home. So I was there talking to them, and I was telling everybody, my mother and father, what was happening, what I was doing, what I was learning, and all of that. And I was whispering in the language. And so all of a sudden, the nun, they had an inspector, and they used to go by row. And all of a sudden, she must have heard me whispering, and she just opened the sheet just like that, really roughly. And she says to me, "Are you praying?" Of course, I was on first line. Yeah, and I said, "Yes, miss." You know, so I got away because I knew if I said no, if I was talking my language, I would be severely punished. Those are the things that I encountered while we were in a residential school. They always made fun of our language and culture. And they all said, "You'll never have a job when to teach your language or your culture. Your culture is witchcraft." And they would show a picture um, of a fire burning, and there's a body there, and there's a guy in red suit with horns like this turning over the body. That's what they would show us when we were caught speaking the language. When we were caught speaking the language, we would all be punished. So therefore, because we would all be punished, sometimes the speaker, the one that got caught, would be severely punished also, but also be ostracized by the group. Uh, those are some of the things that. Another one is I'm gonna tell a story about the jelly bean story. Um, my father used to give me $2 in when I left, and that $2, hey, $2 is you can spend that in 1 minute today, but in that time, that $2 used to last me right from September right till April. I somehow my mind trained me to buy something. We used to have store hours once a month, and then I would buy something like a chocolate bar didn't last very long, so I wanted something that could last me very long. So I bought jelly beans because number one, they were the cheapest, and so I think there was a penny for 5 or something like that. I can't remember which, but that's what I used to do, and then I would keep that, and I would hide it in my personal bags in the box, like. And the only time I brought that out was uh, in our group or was our cousins. If we heard somebody died at home, we would take one jelly bean and we would share that. If we That's the only time that I brought them out. If we got lonesome, that's when I brought it out. If somebody got punished and got strapped and feeling bad, I would bring that out. That one jelly bean, nobody could not take a bigger bite or anything. They all had to be equal. Now somebody asked me, he says, "How did you learn about that?" I thought about it. Yeah, it was from my mother. My mother did the same thing because she used to do preserves. And the only time is she would bring those like maple syrup or strawberries preserve. The only time she would bring that out is um, when somebody died in the community. Sometimes we would be isolated because of a storm, uh, or we are feeling bad about something. Those are the only times that she would bring that out. So it sort of nurtured our spirits. So in the same way about the jelly beans, it nurtured us. We could fight the world, I guess, after that. So those are some of the things that I encountered. I didn't time myself, so Julie, please tell me 5 minutes or something like that um, when it's my time to, you know, or make a signal. You go like this, and then you wring my neck. Okay. Uh, so anyway, that's those are some of the resistance that we followed. And then one of the things that really, really intrigued me was my language was not right. It was not. It was undervalued, and that I would never get a job. So when I quit school at 16, and that's another long story, but I won't tell it here. I quit school when I was 16 because at 16 it's a rite of passage, and the government doesn't go after you. So I always thought that I would finish my education some other time or some other place. So that's what I did. I educated myself. I took because I didn't have high school. I took grade 9 and 10 by correspondence and blah blah blah. And I finally ended up at home looking after my parents, and I did my grade 11 and 12 there with adult education. So I was ready, and then I thought, now what? What will I do? I need to find this. There was 4 things my father told me. Remember who you are. Don't forget your language and culture. Whatever you do in there, be strong. Fourth, go and learn about the Inanak. What the Inanak, I didn't never ever learn it while I was in there. In fact, we were forbidden to talk anything about, when they talked about the history of 1812, I think it was, a soldier boys all said, yay. And all the Iroquois girls, when they talked about the British, they said, yay. Our ancestors helped those people to fight for the land. So that's us girls in there, and then talking about this, how our language is not important. Well, my language was very important to me because that's how we express our ideas as to who we are. And they just couldn't take it out because one of the things I had in mind was they will never ever take it out of here, no matter how many times I got strapped. They would never get it out of my mind. It's in here. It's in here. So they would never take it away. That's the strongest commitment that I had after going to school and that. And I ended up at Toronto University teaching. Taking Native Studies. Native Studies is what nurtured me because I wondered all my life why I was so angry at myself as a Native woman, that I didn't like myself. Who was I becoming? I wish this brownness would go away. When I got from my first pay is I went to the drugstore and I bought white powder just to cover my brownness because whiteness was what you were accepted. So that's what I did. And after going to school at Trent University and getting all my Native Studies degrees, I didn't know why I was going to school, but the reason why I went to school was to learn about myself. Why did I feel so bad about myself? What happened to me in that institution? What made me like that? And what made us like that? And so I wanted to find out. So I learned about psychology and all of those things. And in psychology is where I found out about your humanness, about yourself. Came to the anomaly stage because they used to talk about, the how you like the institution. If it wasn't for the government, you would not have such nice shoes. If you didn't, you don't have to go outside to the toilet and 50 below zero. Here, you just flush your toilet. Well, yes, they were right. They were right. So we have to believe them. How many times? How many minutes?
You're good. You're good.
Good. Okay.
We're going to, so Miigwech, Ogijta, Shirley, you are again the epitome of resistance. And thank you for your story and providing the audience with a little insight into how you arrived to be where you are today, and
Yes.
such an esteemed elder and person within education too. So that's
Yes.
also sort of, an important thing to highlight. And
There's one thing I want. There's
Okay.
one thing I wanted to end with my talk was when I got hired at Trent University to teach the language and culture, the first day that I taught about those nuts that told me that my language, would never get paid for that. And I said to myself, I hope you are turning over your graves, because I'm hired and I'm getting paid to teach my language and culture. And I went to learn about the language. I didn't know how to read and write, but I went to learn to educate myself how to read and write so that I can help my own people. So thank you for listening. Miigwech.
Chimigwet, Shirley.
Yeah.
And next, it's my honor to introduce Dorothy Taylor. So Dorothy Taylor is a Mississauga Anishinaabe elder from Curve Lake First Nation. Dorothy sits as the elder on the Ontario Tech Indigenous Education Advisory Circle. She is known for her work and traditional teachings about the sacredness of water. She is asked to share traditional knowledge and ceremony within her community and various organizations throughout the Peterborough and surrounding area. She is a hand drummer and singer. Elder Dorothy Taylor is the founder of the Sacred Water Circle, inspired by traditional Indigenous teachings and leading with hope and spiritual courage. The Sacred Water Circle sees a restored relationship between human communities and water. She is a member of the Trent University Indigenous Studies Department, Traditional Advisory Council, and she has served as a volunteer on the Petroglyph Advisory Council of Curve Lake for 12 years. She lives in Curve Lake with her husband, Mark, and her 2 teenage sons. So welcome so much. Dorothy, please take it away.
Now, miigwech. And I just want to say to miigwech and to Shirley for your beautiful words. I never actually heard you talk in that much detail about your experience at residential school. And, my mom and dad didn't go to residential school, but they went to day school, on reserve day school. So they got to go home at the end of the day. But they had similar experiences like that. Like my dad said, we'd be out in the yard and kicking the ball around. I go, oh ma, over here it means. And if the teacher heard that, whack, so it was a difficult. However, both my parents were good speakers of the language, but they were experienced so much racism, and they were also experienced negativity about just being Anishinaabe and being a brown skin, so as a result of that, to protect their own girls, I have 2 sisters, they didn't teach us how to speak the language, but it was talked at home, but anyways, thanks to Elder Shirley Williams. I took her language course at Trent University, and what I learned there was the grammar and different things. So when I knew a lot of words, but I didn't know how to put them together. And then now when my parents would talk to each other in the language, I understood what they were saying. They couldn't hide things from me anymore. Anyways, that's amazing. So I had to take it upon myself to learn as much as I could about the language. But what's really important, what the elders were saying, that to be Anishinaabe is to be proud, and to be proud, it's important that you have your Anishinaabe name, find your clan, and to learn the language so that when we live this beautiful life in this Shkakamekwe experience, which is life, which is Mother Earth life, we're here for a short time, not a long time, but it's up to us to learn and to do things to uplift our own self, uplift our family, our community, and our nation. So to have your Nishnaba name and learn your clan, and also to be able to, which it took me a lot of years to learn how to say a prayer in Ojibwe. So that's what I do. And now, and even on the elders here in the village of Curve Lake, you know, they love to tease you. So they know that we can't speak the language. So they'll say, on the go, and then I'd say, and they would say, oh yes, it is a nice day, isn't it? And then they tell my parents later, I didn't know Dorothy could speak Nishnabeg like that. Anyways, it takes a lot to learn the language, but just take it upon yourself to learn at least, you know, even if you know that word miigwech, that's a lot. That's a big word. It's gratitude. That's part of our language. Our culture is to be in gratitude. So just I'm going to start now my teaching, what I was going to share with you about the water. So na how posho nendedog na nimki kapaneshi kwendish na cause wapagog dodem ashki kamang don chaba. Chimigwech gam pashkaded yama Nebe and Kinamagag. So I just said what my native name is. My clan is the White Porcupine, and I'm a member of Curve Lake First Nation, and I live here. And I've experienced over so many years the actual culture of our people, the Mississauga Ojibways. When I was like 21, like what Elder Shirley Williams said about, if we even talked about our culture, if we even participated in ceremony, such as particularly the sweat lodge, you'd be labeled as a witch. Yeah, they called me a witch since I was 21, even my own family. So it was very difficult. So, you know, I had to practice the way I wanted to live. When I heard that first story from those elders, it's like I woke up and my eyes opened up just to see how beautiful world this is. And I had to pursue this. I said, what had affected me that much was one story from an elder who knew that his culture and the teachings of his people. I had to pursue it a little bit more. So from the age of 21, I was an elder groupie. That's what people called me, because anytime there was an elder that came to the city or to the village, I was right there sitting beside them, and I would take them. You know, oftentimes they'd be asked to come to meetings, and then they have their meetings all day, and then they'd be sent back to the hotel to sit there. What do they do? So me and my friends would go knocking on their hotel door and say, "You want to go for supper? Do you want to go for a ride?" You know, and you learn so much as being an elder helper. That's what I was. And I learned I didn't ask them questions. And when I was learning, they said, don't ask questions. What you need to know will come to you as you need it. So nowadays, though, that's changed a wee bit. So I learned a lot just by using my two eyes, my two ears, and just observing and helping as a Shkabe Wishkwa. So a Shkabe Wishkwa. Anyways, in 2010, I was off work for 2 years. You can only see me from this up, you know, but actually I'm living with a disability. I live with a disability of muscular dystrophy. So I use a wheelchair. But what happened was when I went off work through, you know, the disease caught up with me. I couldn't do work as much as I wanted to. So for 2 years, and then I said, I've got all this free time. What should I do? I'm going to listen to what those elders have said, that now is the time that we must come together as the four colors of man, pick up those teachings of our ancestors, and learn that culture, and come together and remember our obligations to this earth, and begin to balance. The balance will return to the world. So when I heard that, I said, I'm Anishinaabe, and my responsibility as a woman is the water. So you and I both know that the waters within our sight and within our relationship is suffering from pollution, neglect, etc. And I said, you know, the people of this world, just in my local area, they don't understand how sacred water is, how important water is to our very life. Can you go, let's try to go, if you go even one day without a sip of liquid or water of any kind, it's very uncomfortable. The second day without water, it's a stress. The third day without water, it's almost beyond endurance. And you begin to understand how important water is to our very life, all life, to begin and to be maintained. So at that time I said, okay, I'm gonna send out a message to my friends and colleagues. Let's start something called, and I didn't know what to call it at the time, but the circle is an important, way of our culture, the circle. So I said, let's call it a sacred water circle. And we began, and we said, let's bring all these elders together from around the world to talk about water and to give us instructions specific on how we can defend the water, protect the water, and to teach about the water. So in 2014, the Sacred Water Circle, which included Elder Shirley Williams and her advice and guidance, we brought together these most amazing elders from all over North America and South America, which included the Kogi people. You should really look it up on the internet, Kogi, Kogi, and then the Hopi, and then the elder Chief Arvo Looking Horse, and elders from the far north, and our own Anishinaabe elders, including our most precious grandmother, Josephine Mandamin Bun. We asked her for her guidance, and I was expecting them to say, this is what you do, this is how you do it, and when you do it, this is how you implement it. I'm very administrative minded, and I was expecting that. But basically what all those elders said, that how we can bring balance back to the world. Now this is not a surprise, but it is very profound, that balance will return to the world, and the land and the water will be restored once we have achieved our own self-love, our own self-worth, and to raise ourselves as individuals up in a good way, in a kind way, an honest way. And once we can achieve that, we share what we know. And in the eventuality, strength will return to your life and to all those you interact with and see. That's what those elders said. Love is forgiving. Love does not keep a record of what was wrongdoing. And water is the most profound life giver of all our existence as we know it. So I want to share a little bit about what I understand in those stories about water. And it goes back to our original teachings of creation. And I'll begin that with the story. And I'll use this rattle. Rattles in our ceremonies and our songs, because when in my story you'll understand why the rattle is so important to us. I'll just begin the story. I'm going to do a quick version. It usually takes me about 30 minutes to talk about this because there's all kinds of elements in it, but I'm going to get you the gist of it. So in the beginning, there was only darkness, nothingness, the great abyss of darkness. What existed in that a great abyss of nothingness and darkness was Gajamanado, the great spirit that we call the great spirit, Gajamanado. Gajamanado became lonesome. And Gajamanado said, it's time that I create something that I could love, that I could admire. And so in that great darkness and abyss of nothingness, the first sound, the first thought of unconditional love by Creator God Gajamanado sounded like this. And what was created was Nonzewabo. Nonzewabo is the water of the cosmos, of the universe, of our galaxy that we call the Milky Way. And when we look upon the night stars and see those beautiful stars, we know that water was, that Nunziwabo created those beautiful stars. Even if you want to Google water in the center of the galaxy we know as the Milky Way, and you will see the truth in what I'm saying. Even sometimes, maybe 2 or 3 times in our lifetime, a comet will come into this orbit. And those comets are made with crystalline water. That's why they shine so brightly as they come into contact with our orbit, So that's the water of the first thought of unconditional love that made it possible for the universe to begin. The next thought of unconditional love by Gajamanado. Medewabo. Medewabo is spirit water. It is that energy, that spirit that made it possible for all life to begin. And it is that water. Where did I put it now? When we pray for water in our ceremonies. I just had it here. It's when women are asked to speak for the water, that means we're asked to pray for that water. And we put it in a copper vessel. And in that copper vessel is that midday wabo. And we say, Denama tamin se in the bit. Shanat toyan in the bit. We do question chicken to end on in the bit. Panekam nagame. May it now and forever run clear and clean through the veins of our mother. May it now and forever bring life to all life in all sentient beings, now until 7 times 7 generations. So that's that water. And you might think, why is it the women that are responsible for the water? And the answer is really, we are creators. We're not creator God, but we can hold life in our room for 9 months. And that baby, that human life, is created in our womb in that embryonic fluid. And that also is midewabo, that spirit water. And when the baby is about to come and take its first breath, Bejik Nasewin, that it's that they say, my water broke. So that first water and that baby comes, that's midewabo. So it's us women that create the families, the community, the nation. How vital that responsibility and that obligation is. That midday wobble, that we pray for that water daily And this is what grandmother Josephine Mandamin said to us. This is what I learned from her. She said, every day, say gratitude for that water in these copper vessels, this little one. And you just hold it up. As soon as you wake up and you have your first, maybe it's a cup of coffee, maybe it's orange juice, and maybe it's just like water. And then you raise it up and say, in your language of your own understanding, English or whatever language is your first language, miigwech, 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 miigwech. And showing gratitude to that midday wobble daily. It creates a very strong relationship with that water that we call Gitchatuanabe, sacred water. And so it becomes more than just an element of H2O or a commodity that's bought and sold. Many of us actually can't drink the water that comes out of our tap anymore. How awful that is. And you know, it's not a good situation we're in. So we have to buy bottled water at Walmart for $24, 24 for $2. I know it's crazy, but we must. Like Curve Lake First Nation, we are on a boil water advisory almost monthly. The people that live in the subdivision, they can't drink their water. So I don't blame them to have to go buy water. But it's so important to say gratitude to that midday wobble. The next thought of unconditional love by Creator God. Dodo wobble. Dodo means breast, the breast of the mother. So, you know, the mother is what we call a Shkakamikwe, Mother Earth. And the lakes, the rivers, the oceans, the brooks, even that beautiful rain, we had so much of it this past week, Gamewan, that falls from the sky. That is that Dodo wobble. So that's the water. If you're not, you're not in position of power and influence that make decisions in terms of legislation or laws or protection, conservation for that water, what can you do? Like me, I'm a Nishnabakwa in a wheelchair. What can I do? Or, I'm a poor mother on single mother and welfare. What can I do? Something like that, Well, the most profound and most effective thing that you can do for that water is to pray and say, may that water be protected. Miigwech for that water. And, it really has a very, tangible effect on that water, because water has a spirit. Water is alive. And it hears us when we say our prayers, whether or not we're beside it or thinking about it. It's very profound and it's magical. The next thought of unconditional love is the loudest, happiest. What was created was Miskowabo. Misko means red. That's the water that is pumped by our heart through our veins. That red water, Miskowabo. So, the first thought of unconditional love by Creator God is in our veins. That makes you, that makes me a sacred person. We are beautiful. We are smart. We are capable. And our brains, if we can connect our brain into our heart, that's a profound connection, because the thoughts and actions that we do will always be, informed by how smart we are and how we feel. So I say to you today, you are sacred. You are beautiful. Do not ever have negative thoughts about yourself. And I know sometimes how difficult that is, that we say, oh, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I can't do what I can't do, I'm not as good as anybody else. Yeah, those thoughts come in our minds a lot. So what I ask you to do then is a personal practice. Like when you get up in the morning, first thing you do is go into that washroom, right? So you see where your reflection in the mirror. What do you say? This is what I say. I ask you to do daily for the rest of your life. Look at your reflection. Connect with your eyes and say this to yourself. Hello, beautiful, or hello, handsome. I love you. To say you how much you love yourself. I love you. Do that on a daily basis. And eventually it manifests into reality. And you can really believe that I am a beautiful, lovely person and I love myself. Sometimes though, even that is not enough. So I've learned these, a personal practice of positive affirmations. It really helps, I'm telling you. So this is what I say to myself, especially when I'm asked, like talking on a panel, on this important panel with other beautiful women who are so accomplished and educated. You kind of say, me? Who's me? In my seat. So before I came on, so I said, I'm a beautiful, kind, smart, capable woman. And I say that 7 times. I'm a beautiful, kind, smart, capable woman. And I say that 7 times. Even I do that daily. And sometimes even at night before I close my eyes, I say that. So find a personal affirmation that lifts yourself up and talk to yourself daily. It's not selfish. It's not narcissistic, but it's an actual profound and essential way that we must exist and think of ourselves. If we are to bring balance back to the world, if we are able to be warriors and defend and protect that water, and to influence those who are in positions of power at all levels of government, corporations and such, to do the right thing for water. Gitchatuanabe was sacred and it has a spirit. I thank you very much for giving me this little bit of time to share the little bit I know from those ancestors and my understanding. And I hope that I'm able to help just a little bit in your everyday life. Naha, miigwech.
Miigwech, Dorothy, for your kind and wonderful words. I think sometimes people have an image of a warrior as, somebody holding a weapon of destruction.
That's right.
Oftentimes a warrior is, well, a soft and gentle, let's do it with kindness.
Exactly. That's right.
So miigwech so much for your kind words, and I'm sure our audience will have some additional questions for you, but I am going to introduce our next panelist now. So Vanessa Gray is a 28-year-old queer Anishinaabe Kwe from the Amjiwanong First Nation, located in Canada's Chemical Valley. As a grassroots organizer, land defender, and educator, Vanessa works to decolonize environmental justice research by linking scholarly findings to traditional teachings. Vanessa is a co-founder of Amjiwanong and Sarnia Against Pipelines, or ASAP. Host of the annual Toxic Tour of Canada's Chemical Valley, she continues to take part in a diversity of tactics such as direct action, classroom lectures, co-hosting toxic tours, and water gatherings. This is a quote from Vanessa. Growing up, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name of your community properly. I'm sure you will include that in your introduction. Growing up in Amjiwanong, surrounded by petrochemical refineries, has always made me question my relationship to the environment. Being Indigenous in Canada continues to be the struggle to uphold my responsibility to the Anishinaabe territory. Education and understanding our interconnectedness our interconnected struggles is essential to our ever-growing movement, but we can't afford not to take risks for a sustainable and just future. So Vanessa, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of our panel. And I'm going to hand the floor over to you now. Chi-miigwech.
Hi, I'm just gonna share my screen now. Making sure this works. Okay, just bear with me for one moment. This is not the beginning. Okay. So Ani, Buju, Vanessa Gray, Indigenous, Janong Donjaba, Anishinaabe Nidao, Mukwen Dodam, Anish, I think I said Anishinaabe Nidao. Hi, I'm Vanessa. My spirit name is Benesianiquit, which means thundercloud. I'm part of the Bear clan. I'm from Amjanong. I grew up there, and then now I'm currently working for the University of Toronto, living in Toronto. And I am working in a lab called the Technoscience Research Unit. So I guess I'll just start from the beginning now. So I appreciate all the words that have been said so far, all the comforting, nice things that have been said. And it's so important to try and balance these really heavy topics out with that. This is just a picture like off like a dock on the res, and it's just to acknowledge our traditional relationship with these waters, and we acknowledge how this is how like we travel, this is how we feed ourselves, this is how all the animals get the nourishment that they need, and this is our direct connection to our future generations and our past generations. So just to acknowledge our own relationship with these waters as Anishinaabe people. I guess before I move on, there's parts of my family that are Anishinaabe, but we're also Potawatomi, and there's parts of like my dad's side that are Oneida. So obviously, I'm sure we are all aware that Anishinaabe territory is well traveled and unfortunately well divided as well. And obviously we didn't always live on reserves, and we would use different parts of the territory for different seasonal uses. And that's something that is always at the top of my mind when I see this river, because this is technically like an international border, but we all know this is all Anishinaabe territory. So I'm not sure how much of this you can see. I always forget that you kind of get cut off when you're presenting on Zoom. But my work with the University of Toronto began with a lot of archival research. And what we were trying to do was to make those historical connections to Aamjiwnaang, to the Anishinaabe territory, and basically like how we came to be where we are now. And this is partially because of like my more like grassroots, like educational work, of a few years of being asked by non-Indigenous people, like, why don't you just move? Or why is there so many petrochemical industries surrounding your community? And then again, like, why don't you move? Obviously, this whole situation happened 1850s when Canadian surveyors had found gum beds within the territory, not quite in Aamjiwnaang. It's kind of in an area called Petrolia and Oil Springs now. And then that led to like the first oil well was drilled around that time as well. And so this was after the lumber industry had already come in, and that was kind of like the main resource in this area before oil being extracted and then refined. So it was kind of like a progression of colonial tactics, and just looking at this beautiful part of the lake and river as resources. So the first and oldest company in the area was called Standard Oil. And this company has kind of just rebranded, sold off, and has kind of come down to Imperial Oil, which is just underneath Exxon Oil. So it's one of like the main companies that had begun like the Industrial Revolution. And so this company was formed the same year as residential school had become mandatory. So the same year that this company was formed, I think it was like less official, but within like the next like 3 or 4 years, then residential school became mandatory. And so around that time, it was also like we were separated, segregated by the pass system. And so we weren't allowed to grow food without permission. We weren't allowed to even purchase food without permission. And so these were very dark times. And this is very much, I know this looks like an old map, but it very much looks like exactly the way Sarnia, Ontario looks. Because in the tourism pages you might find, it's all about the Blue Water Bridge, which is just at that small gap at the bottom of the lake up there. And then it's just like got broken up into properties. And it's a bunch of houses and communities. And in between Sarnia, there is industry. So I grew up in Aamjiwnaang, and myself, my younger sibling, who's non-binary and two-spirit, and my older brother, we all required puffers, like for our asthma. And we felt like it was very normal because a lot of other children required puffers. And I even remember like being in daycare, and there was a time when we would all line up for our puffers because we all needed it. And these impacts kind of weren't obvious, I guess. There was nothing obvious about what was going on, except that a lot of my family and a lot of friends within the community, family died of cancer or eventually got cancer. And it was happening a lot. It happens like breast cancer was super common in certain parts of the community. And I couldn't even count how many funerals I had been to by the time I got to high school. And I remember a friend saying like, oh, I had to go to like, you know, my grandpa's funeral. That was the first funeral I had ever been to. And I was like, really? That's a common thing for my community. And these connections between the refineries and our general surroundings, our environments, are never really explicitly talked about. And, you know, understandably, this is, again, not a new issue. And it's probably hard and hurtful for Indigenous people to have to talk about the ongoing violence of colonial tactics on our own bodies at this point, because part of my research includes the listed chemicals released from these refineries, and so many of them you can't sense through smell or taste, or like you can't sense a lot of the most dangerous chemicals. Some of the more studied ones are carcinogens, which are cancer causing. And because of that, there is no safe amounts of exposure to those chemicals. Even though these companies report the amounts of, for example, benzene that they spill, they still do it, and they're still clustered all together. This is just a quick, like, I don't know, visualization of like the different types of multinational companies that you would see in Amjadang. And we are literally surrounded. To get to the res from Sarnia, you pass a lot of industry, and then you see Suncor, which is like in that picture that I just showed. And then you get through the res, and then you keep going down the river. And once you get out of the res, you have to drive past a huge shell refinery. And it's just, there's like no like safe way or safe direction to be in. And so of course, myself and other like younger folks have taken like interest in these types of impacts. And I've learned about toxic tours from other like warriors, I guess you would call them, who ask the direct questions to industry to like actually bring up the discussion of those impacts on us. And it's a very unpopular opinion to look at industry in a negative way in a town like Sarnia, because everybody and their dad and their grandpa all have those family ties to those industries, because why else would they be there? Why else would, like, why would they defend this so much? Because industry brought people there to work in industry, and then that's how they claim community. So obviously I'm a millennial, and by the time I came around, there was already quieter, but there were good discussions of climate change. And so making that connection of like, we can't pollute, this is a bad thing for all of us, was like maybe my first step in this direction. And then turning off the lights was like a thing, and I was a very greenwashed person at one point. And I really wasn't aware of what my actual responsibilities were to this issue until I was invited to the Alberta tar sands in Fort McMurray by the Athabasca First Nation grassroots organizers there, who were all women. And they were hosting a healing walk, and eventually, somewhere down the line, I was invited, and I went to Alberta thinking like I had no idea what the tar sands were. And then I went there and I just saw like a sandy, stinky, smelly, awful desert in the middle of Alberta with these like massive like trucks and these like incredible Indigenous women leading this like healing walk. And then I went home understanding the Indigenous relationship and responsibilities to our environment around us. And then that's when I started organizing in the grassroots capacity with community. And so this is just, I know you may not be able to see this, but this is just a little tiny peek into like a bit of the connections between industries themselves and then the people who connect them, the banks who connect each other, and how it's just like its own little system that supports itself with the right amount of rights and money. They can support each other. So this is the daycare I attended with my brother, and my sibling went there for a bit of time before they moved all the children to another building in another part of the reserve because of the high amounts of benzene that they were finding in the air right there because of that refinery across the street. So yeah, I grew up seeing refineries every day and not understanding it and not getting the harm really until like I made the direct connection between the environmental impacts of these emissions. And so this is 40% of Canada's petrochemical industry. There are over 50 facilities within a 10-kilometer radius of our community. And this has led to a skewed birth ratio for like, more girls being born than boys. And that was only, discovered by community members asking each other these questions that are really hard to talk about, like your family's like health struggles, but also seeing that those struggles are happening in all of our households and all of our families. So there's a lot of like direct impacts. There's a lot more information on our website, landandrefinery.org. So all of this research we've been doing so far, we've put up online. Some of the research isn't there yet because we're trying to visualize it a bit more versus just throwing like words at you. And part of our research, like I mentioned, is like the impacts that chemicals have on our bodies. And what we have done as a lab is create an app for community members and maybe one day other communities to be able to understand that link between the harmful environmental impacts and our bodies. But for now, we are just starting in and around Amjinong because there are the most amount of industry, and the system we have right now isn't very helpful, nor has it changed in many, many years, where we get notifications about spills and releases on the regular. And these industries can spill and release at any time, any day. And we're expected to report to the ministry what we're experiencing and trust that they're going to do something with that information. And often it doesn't lead to anything because the air monitors that they do have in the community don't ever pick up anything, even when there is a spill, and even when people are on Facebook and talking about their headaches or the rash that they feel, and this communication and information was just kind of chaotic. And so this app is to help community members look up maybe a symptom that they're feeling, or a smell that they're smelling, or a chemical if it's announced that has spilled, and what the impacts are of being exposed to that chemical. So as you can see, you can look in many different directions of how one would be feeling during a chemical release or spill, and in many different ways, because sometimes that's just how it happens. And then there's the direct correlation of strong evidence, or sometimes there isn't strong evidence between how one would feel it and the chemical. And so this information is inaccessible online. So if you were to like Google benzene, or if you were to Google any of these chemicals that are being released, it's a lot of jargon that will be thrown at you, and it's really hard to understand. And so we've taken all that information and put it into like easier terms and quicker ways for you to get that information for, whatever it may be that you need it. With Pollution Reporter, you can also use the app to report the incident yourself. And then once you're finished filling this information sheet out, you're not required to fill out all of it if you don't know like much of anything. I send like blank reports all the time just to make sure it's working, and I'm sure the ministry loves that. But what's important is that when you send your pollution report, a copy of it will be saved to your email. So you're not giving away that information and then never hearing about it again. It's like you're able to keep your own record, and then you'll know like the date and time, because often when these situations do go to court, it's 2 years after the incident that you'll have someone at the ministry knocking at your door asking about a specific incident 2 years ago. And it's just not strong. It's not a strong case. And these cases never, like hardly ever go anywhere beyond a failed investigation by the ministry. And so this is the idea that hopefully not only does Amjinong need to be on the front line of many different companies, but we could also be the beginning to Indigenous data sovereignty. There is so much information that is being taken and understood by these aging, old infrastructures that are continuously spilling into our environment, and chemicals don't go away when they are spilled, they accumulate. And this is what the Canadian government also fails to even like remotely understand or look into, because accumulation since before Canada was even a country would probably be impossible to understand. Yet they are still allowed to operate as companies on a facility by facility basis, when in actuality, these facilities are sharing a fence line with another multinational company. So I tried to keep it short. I think those were like my main points. But thank you all so much, miigwech. Like I said, there's lots more information online. And we are on social media, on Twitter at Take Action ASAP, and on Facebook, Amjinong is Starting Against Pipelines ASAP, and there's our email. Miigwech, thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today, Vanessa. The correlation between violence against the land, violence against Indigenous communities is so apparent. So thank you for sharing. And I know that we have questions from our panelists, or not from our panelists, for our panelists, from our audience members, and we'll take some time to go through some of the questions. So one of them is, and I think it's very important at this time, is how can we further support, land defenders, water defenders, language defenders? So how can the audience here support what is happening in your community? And I'll ask that one to Vanessa directly.
So I have done this talk many, many different times. And I think when it's a lot of information for most people to just walk into. But I think for me, I really want people to understand the responsibilities of environmental racism, of intergenerational trauma, is not on us Indigenous people to solve.
Mm-hmm.
because we all share the water, we all share the air. And I think Canadians should feel that responsibility heavily. I think there shouldn't be a single comfortable Canadian who can listen to any of our stories and comfortably go to their cottage and ignore the other Canadian flags that go up or the celebrations there are for Canada. I think, you know, I hate it when I get called like a rock star by some like white person. And they think that that's just like, oh, kudos to Indigenous people because you're doing something. And it's like, I'm, you know, judging you hard because you're not doing enough. So, I mean, I just want to again thank you both, other speakers, for Dorothy and Shirley for speaking with me again. And there's a lot of very like useful things that can be done, I think, about many of these issues. Like, I think if, you know, Canadians aren't aware, CSIS surveils Indigenous land defenders and spends a lot of money and a lot of resources surveilling us. I have an OPP officer that texts and calls me all the time because they just want to know what's up. They sent militant police forces to Wet'suwet'en territory for people who were just peacefully standing in the way of a pipeline company. You know, there is a very scary police brutality mindset against Indigenous peoples because we're treated like criminals. And this is a Canadian issue. And so like, that's like something, like I wish I could feel safe on my own territory, but I don't. The chemicals make it feel unsafe. The police make it feel unsafe. General like white men coming across in any situation make me feel unsafe. And I don't think, you know, Canadians understand how uncomfortable it is for Indigenous women to feel, to try and feel safe at all. And it's usually just in ceremony spaces I can fully relax. And, you know, most of Canada is not that.
Well, I think the important part of our discussion tonight is to, you know, shine a spotlight on all of these inequities within Canada, the nation state. And really what we're hoping to do is to move our allies into action so that the voice of Indigenous peoples are elevated. So I want to thank you for bringing, you know, your voice to that. And I'm going to ask another question again related to you. And it was, let me just get it here. Were there any, you know, traditional uses for oil or tar by Indigenous peoples?
So our relationship with like, you know, the bitumen, which is like the unrefined version of oil, was, you know, it wasn't like we didn't know it was there. We always knew it was there, but it was more useful for just like patching up like canoes or like using it to like do like little things here and there, but it wasn't like our main resource. Obviously our main resource is the water, and so it was for like making like tools or things like that. It wasn't yeah, it also probably wasn't a secret either. It, you know, it probably took a long time before Canadian officials came in and were like, we can officially say that there's gun beds here, and then that's when they moved in.
Great, thank you for that. I'll ask another one to one of our panelists, is how can the general public support land back movements or environmental movements? Maybe I'll go to Dorothy if you.
Sure. Okay. Well, Durham Region area, you know, Oshawa in particular, and there's many, many bodies of water. First of all, the greatest being Lake Ontario. Nobody can swim in that water anymore. I was, you know, incidentally, I was born and raised in Oshawa. I went to O'Neill College, O'Neill High School, and I graduated from R.S. McLaughlin. So I'm very familiar with the Durham region, Whitby, right into Toronto. But going through, most cities have bodies of water close to it or near it, which would include lakes or even creeks and brooks. You'd be surprised just how much garbage and debris is thrown into the, or, you know, accumulates. So a simple way would be to, on the weekend, have your family and friends get together and do a little bit of shore cleanup. It's just like going into your bedroom and you have to, or your kitchen, you have to do the dishes every day. You have to, you know, be mindful of your garbage and putting it out. The same with the lakes and the creeks and the beds that go through your places where you're living. Don't ignore it. Make a very decisive action about, you know, going to those areas and cleaning up the shoreline. In addition to, while you're doing that work, is to always put traditional tobacco in the water and say miigwech to that water. You know, that energizes our positive thoughts and our positive way of thinking and directed towards that water. And, you know, even if you went to that Masa Emoto, who was a Japanese biologist, he showed like how our actions, our words directed towards water affects the molecular makeup of the water. So yeah, look him up, Dr. Emoto from Japan. He's passed away now, like 5 years ago. It was very unfortunate. He was doing a lot of great work. Yeah, thanks. That's a little bit anyway, something.
Miigwech for that, Dorothy. So another question that's come up is, what lessons can we take from the victory of the land back defenders at 1492 Land Back Lane? And this is like recent news that has come up. I'm just wondering if any of our panelists have any comments about that recent victory. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, so well, this is more information that the rest of our people tuning in today might want to look more at what's happened in 1492 Land Back Lane and see what that victory is about. You can, you know, we really are promoting self-education. We're providing a lot of links and a lot of tools for you to direct your own understanding of what's happening within these realms. And at this time, I'm cognizant of the time, and I would like to allow our lovely Sherry Kabiase to end our session this evening with some closing words. And I just personally would like to thank all of our panelists for providing such good conversation and hopefully opening the minds of all of the people in our audience this evening. So miigwech, miigwech, miigwech. And I'll pass it over to Sherry Kabiase.
Thank you, Julie. Ani Bonjour, Sherry Indigenous. This is Saga First Nation and Sagamok First Nation Dunjaba. I am with the Whitby Public Library. We are keeper of books, stories, information technology, and communication. Land and water defenders protect the rights of Mother Earth. They are the stewards of our land and our traditional knowledge of the Indigenous people. who have lived here thousands of years. July 1st, Canada celebrated 154 years. The Indigenous people have been here close to 15,000. Researchers have estimated that Canada has taken over $600 trillion in resources from the land, despite treaties that agreed only to the use of plow deep. When we are doing resource extraction, these actions must be sustainable. They must be culturally relevant. They must be economically responsible. And we must think about the revitalization each year and each season. They must be biodiverse. They must sustain Indigenous cultures, their spirituality, their ceremony, their language, and their sovereignty. We are constantly protecting our lands and our waters and our wildlife. Millions of taxpayers' dollars every year are spent on legal fees as the government fights the Indigenous people. We must remember that the treaties signed with the Crown are as valid today as they were when they were signed. The Supreme Court of Canada upholds the treaty rights, and they are constitutionally protected. The court will not allow the government to extinguish treaty rights. There is a lack of understanding and knowledge to those treaties, and Canada and Canadians, as well as politicians, it wasn't taught in school, and misinformation has been allowed to proliferate. As I listen to many of the non-Indigenous leaders, it's obvious they have not taken time to learn about the First Peoples of this land. Their rhetoric and ignorance is oft repeated in comment sections of any news articles online. Only when we have truth will we actually have reconciliation. As you can see here, resistance cannot be seen as illegal. Resistance cannot be seen as a protest. Resistance must be seen as protecting the land that must support all of our lives. Resistance must be seen as the Indigenous people living their lives that have lived here long before settlers arrived. We can live for months without food, but we can only live a few days without water. And when you hear that water is life, this is the absolute truth. The RCMP, who are the body that enforce the laws in Canada, are often used to police instead for the government and those multinational interests that we heard about, and not to actually protect the laws of Canada. Section 35 of the Constitution explicitly recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal people of Canada. Section 35 also indicates that the term Aboriginal people of Canada includes First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We heard about some of the protests that have been held, the murders, the deaths that have happened. And the government, they proclaim days. We've got an auspicious World Water Day, and yet we still have 41 First Nations in Ontario who do not have clean water. I am a reader. I read a lot of dystopian, apocalyptic, and post-apocalyptic books. And these authors have been warning us for years what will happen when the earth can no longer sustain us. Coronavirus has been a wake-up call. The 49.5 degrees Celsius temperatures in BC have been a wake-up call. The fires in the Gulf of Mexico is a wake-up call. There have been gas leaks and oil leaks, and land has been washed away after clear cutting. These are all wake-up calls. I have been called a communist and I have been called a left-wing fanatic. But if it means that we see long-term sustainability and long-term stewardship plans, long-term environmental protections, and long-term equity and equality, you can call me whatever you want. I stand with my Indigenous brothers and sisters. I stand with the 7th generation. We don't have another world to move to. A good friend of mine told me recently that when this pandemic began, her first action was to buy seeds. I said, I've been collecting books on survival and homesteading skills. Last year, we saw the chaos of people flooding grocery stores and gas stations. Can you imagine what it would be like if water was no longer potable and the air no longer breathable? I don't worry so much about getting sick or dying. I just worry that one day we won't have a planet for our children. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are grateful that what we have created is important to you. And in our first panel, we spoke to reconciliation as it reflects upon justice, governance, education, family, and child services. Today, we've talked about the impact upon our lands, our water, our culture, and our languages. We invite you to stay with us and join us for our next session when we will hear from our Indigenous leaders. We will have a keynote from our newly elected Grand Council Chief, Reg Niganob, who is also the chief of my mom's reserve, Mississauga First Nation. Thank you so much to Julie for her powerful words, her experiences, and her friendship. We have connected in different ways over the years, and today I'm happy to be a part of this together. To our elders, Shirley, Dorothy, and Vanessa, Chimigwech, I am honored to be here with you, to learn from you. Your teachings are important, not just to our people, but as a key to truth for our non-Indigenous community. Thank you to our partners and to our sponsors, and always a special thank you to our tech team who have made this presentation go so smoothly this evening. As librarians and educators, we have the key to many resources. Our team has collected a great list in our last session, and again, we will include a list of our resources from this session. Our next session is resilience. Resilience is strength. It is inner strength that helps people to survive and to continue to face the adversity. As more news of more bodies of residential schools experience fill the news and social media, it's very clear that the Indigenous people of Canada are resilient. We are still here. There are many of us here in Durham Region. We ask that you see us and that you hear us and that you stand with us and support us. Miigwech, Bamapi.